Let me just acknowledge one of our distinguished visitors who's here today, Secretary of State George Shultz. Secretary Shultz is just back from Washington, where he testified last week in support of a carbon tax. This lecture is named after our classmate, Conradin von Gugelberg, who died 25 years ago. We remember him most for his persistent concern for the planet. In his memory, friends and family set up a fund to support environmental programs at the business school, including case studies, internships, and recycling initiatives. The CVG Fund's annual lecture has become a major gathering for the business school and the entire Stanford community. Over the years, we've had a distinguished list of speakers from heads of EPA, CEOs of companies in the Fortune 500, and directors of leading environmental groups. Our speaker today, Mary Nichols, adds more depth to this legacy. Mary serves as chairman of the California Air Resources Board, which experts believe is the most influential air pollution agency in the United States, if not the world. Rules concerning emissions from cars and trucks, power plants, factories, and agriculture get adopted in California and then spread to other states, the federal EPA, and even to other countries. Mary has led the agency twice, when Jerry Brown was first governor from 1975 to 83, and then since 2007, when Governor Schwarzenegger asked her to return. Governor Brown reappointed her in 2011. In this hyper-partisan political world, two governors, one Democrat, one Republican, knew competence when they saw it. In between her time at ARB, Mary served as Assistant Administrator for Air at the US EPA during the Clinton administration. She was also Secretary for Resources of the state of California, among other posts. Mary Nichols has been a dogged defender of Assembly Bill 32, the state's climate and clean energy law. In the face of a severe recession and an oil company-backed ballot initiative that would have repealed the law, Mary is focused on showing the world that it's possible to reduce emissions and grow the economy. She's done it through a remarkably transparent regulatory process in which businesses, environmental groups, and average citizens have all had their say. At the end of the day, Chairman Nichols' leadership on climate has kept our state moving forward. When the head of EPA, Lisa Jackson, announced that she was leaving government, Mary Nichols' name appeared on many short lists for who was best qualified to succeed Administrator Jackson. Last Monday, President Obama chose somebody else, perhaps realizing that California and the nation needed Mary to stay right here. So please welcome our CVG speaker for 2012-13 school year, Mary Nichols.
Thank you.
We were hoping to start our conversation by asking you if you could tell the audience what the goals for cap and trade were in California, and as well how this fits in the broader framework of the AB 32 policy.
Sure. Let me take you back to 2006 when the California legislature passed AB 32. I wasn't there. I was at UCLA, actually, running an interdisciplinary environmental program, following what was happening in the California legislature, but not all that closely because it seemed as though it wasn't really likely that this bill was going to pass. And it took a sort of a heroic effort at the very end by a number of people to actually pull the legislation together. And when it was passed, it was done with a compromise that was brokered between the governor and the legislature. So the governor, who of course was a Republican, was a very strong believer in market-based programs, and he insisted that the cap and trade program be a feature of the California climate program. The legislature, under the firm control of Democratic leadership, was extremely suspicious of market mechanisms in general and cap and trade in particular, and they did not want this to be part of the bill at all. They wanted it to be purely regulatory. So the compromise that led to the bill finally passing and being signed by the governor was that the Air Resources Board, which was handed the assignment to implement this legislation, was permitted to institute a market-based mechanism. They didn't even use the word cap and trade if they made certain findings, that it would not interfere with air pollution control programs, that it would not create any undue or disproportionate impacts on poor communities, disadvantaged communities, that it was more effective than the pure regulatory program and so forth. So that was the slate that I saw when I got to Sacramento in 2007 and was handed the assignment of implementing this law.
So I guess this answers somewhat my second question, but I imagine that took out a carbon tax very early from the discussion, or was it still part of the discussion when designing?
Actually, the words carbon tax were not uttered by anyone. This was not a partisan question at that point. Nowadays, there are at least a few brave souls in Washington who are willing to speak up on behalf of a carbon tax, and I'm very happy to hear that they invited Secretary Shultz to come and speak on that topic, because I've heard him on it, and he's very eloquent. But no one thought that the legislature was interested in passing a tax. It's very difficult to do under any circumstances, but under the rules that apply in California, it would have taken a 2/3 vote. And at that point, there was no way that Republicans in the legislature would have voted for any form of a new tax. So that topic was just off the table.
So one of the other challenges that come up when implementing climate regulation is that it often is thought of having competitiveness effects. So by taxing California or by putting a cap and trade program in California, we are making Californian firms less competitive. So I was wondering, how did you manage the concerns about leakage during the discussions of AB 32? And how did you think about the worries that some activity would relocate out of California?
Well, first of all, before I answer your question, I think I need to set the stage a little better than we have up until now. AB 32 didn't come out of nowhere. It was, and it wasn't just the brainchild of one or two, leftish legislators. It was, in fact, something that was very strongly supported by a number of businesses in California. It was certainly, the leadership came from our own Silicon Valley, from our venture capitalists who were investing in all kinds of clean technologies, businesses that had ideas about technologies that they wanted to promote, and even AB 32 was supported by some of our larger businesses who stand to incur higher costs as a result of this, of having to do something about climate change, but who believed enough in California as a laboratory, as an economy that was big enough to do something meaningful, but still contained enough so that you could do something that might be an experiment here. And if the experiment was not completely successful, that you could change it. And I think it's a really important factor when you're talking about policy as opposed to theory, to understand that one of the reasons why California historically has been able to be a leader in environmental policy and now in energy policy and climate policy is that we have been known over the years as a place where legislation can pass reasonably quickly and can also be amended when it needs to be. So you don't have these decade-long struggles to pass bills here in general that you have at the national level. Okay, so your question is about impacts on businesses that might feel that they were less competitive as a result of it. Well, again, a little bit of context. Cap and trade is the thing that most people talk about right now. It's the hot issue in terms of AB 32 because it's the latest thing that we've implemented. But it actually is not the biggest piece of our AB 32 program. California's program to meet our climate goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in 2020 to 1990 levels is controlled by a plan which has many different elements to it. The foundation of it is actually our auto emission standards, which began much earlier. Back in 2004, California began working on greenhouse gas emission standards for new motor vehicles, for cars and light trucks. And in our plan for meeting AB 32, we have a number of other pieces that are directed at specific pieces of the economy that are big contributors to global warming. So the low carbon fuel standard, the renewable portfolio standard for electricity, and so forth. The cap and trade program comes as the icing on the cake. It's the top piece of that whole set of layers that gets us to the goal. And in that sense, it works together with all these other regulations and policies to allow somewhat more diversity and more opportunity for the companies that are covered by it to find emissions reductions in other places, including from sectors that aren't even under the cap. So it's a way of actually opening up the program and allowing for more freedom when it comes to figuring out how to reduce emissions. The companies that feel themselves to be the most vulnerable to competition from other places where they won't have, won't be subject to similar kinds of regulations, in general, were treated under the cap and trade program in a special way. First of all, we started the program by giving away allowances as opposed to auctioning them. Economists would tell us the most efficient way to do this is to auction all the allowances, to discover the price that way, fair competition, and so forth. But we believed that this program was going to be tough enough to get going that we should start it a little more gradually. And so early on, Governor Schwarzenegger made it known that he wanted to see us give away the bulk of the allowances for the first few years of the program. So we designed the program that way. And in deciding how to give the allowances away at the beginning, we basically looked at individual sectors of our economy, like cement plants or oil refineries or manufacturing facilities, looked at whether that particular sector was facing a great deal of exposure to trade and competition, which we did using basically federal government sources, and then allocated within that sector based on the efficiency of individual firms. So just to take the oil refining sector as an example, they received as a group, the 13 refineries in California, 90% of emissions allowances that they needed to cover all of their emissions at the very beginning, just handed them over. They still had this 10% gap. And within that 90%, individual refiners were rewarded for being the most efficient. So the refineries that had the highest output per unit of CO2 got all their allowances, whereas those who used a lot more energy to produce their fuels got less. And that, of course, was, once they realized what was happening, that set off a lot of discontent among them and complaints about some people being trade exposed and so forth. But in that particular industry, even though they have made a strong argument that they are exposed to trade because we import fuels from other places, other states, we can bring it in on tankers, et cetera, they also have the ability to sell their product elsewhere too. I mean, they operate in a totally global environment. So we did not treat them as being highly trade exposed. On the other hand, there are some companies that we felt were highly trade exposed, and for those sectors, we gave them 100% of their allowances to start with an agreement that we would monitor the situation. And that's the other thing that, thinking about how you can make something this big and complicated actually happen is people knew that we were going to be reevaluating this program on an annual basis. We have quarterly auctions. We reevaluate people's allocations every year. If we see that we're in fact experiencing leakage because business is going to other places, we have the ability to adjust before this becomes a major problem. And I think the sense that I'm not saying that everyone thinks our program is wonderful or that they trust the Air Resources Board to do this perfectly. That would be far from true. But I think there's a sufficient degree of belief that we will be able to adjust and that we'll respond to the political process so that people were willing to go forward with this program with that understanding.
So moving to the topic of the auction, I come myself from Europe, and we had a similar experience. We started giving all the permits for free. Actually, by law, it had to be at least 95% for free by law. Some countries went up to 100%. But now, as the program evolves, we are getting more and more revenue from the auctions because we have been reducing the. In a sense, we have been reducing over time the number of free allowances that we give. So I was wondering, in California, what are the plans as these revenues potentially grow in the future? What are the plans for those revenue auctions?
Well, first of all, we are auctioning from the beginning 2 different kinds of allowances. With the electric utility sector, those companies, PG&E, for example, who are regulated by the Public Utilities Commission and operate under regulation for the benefit of consumers, are required to put all their free allowances up for auction and then to buy back what they need. So that's a large volume of the allowances that were in the auctions. The first 2 auctions are from the utilities. The state itself kept back about 10% of the total allowances in each compliance period, with the idea that we would auction those and then the revenue could be used to pursue a variety of different programs that would be helpful in achieving our AB 32 goals. So the auction of state allowances is relatively small, and one of the things that I think has been kind of interesting to watch is how, press and critics of the program first were complaining that we were conducting any kind of an auction and, raking in all this money for the state. Now they're complaining not enough money. They want more money. If this is such a great program, why aren't you getting, $20 instead of $10 for an allowance? So this is kind of a mixed bag. And one of the things that I find myself constantly explaining in various different forums is this is actually not a program about raising revenue. It is not a program about creating a market. The market is incidental to our goal, which is reducing CO2 and meeting our goals. And so, it's kind of a strange new world in which an air pollution regulatory agency is running this market. But we're believers, and we think we've got enough experts helping us from people who do run markets and who know what the pitfalls and opportunities are, that we can do this with integrity and get results, but also have it be a valid market. However, at the end of the day, we're trying to get rid of the commodity that we're dealing with here. So this is not something it's not sustainable forever, as a market program. And that's a big difference, I think.
So you mentioned California as being some sort of a lab for the United States. So I was wondering how the experience is being received in Washington, D.C., and what are the perspectives? Have you been sharing the experiences, and what are the interactions and the potentials of California bringing climate change policy in the U.S.?
Well, there was a huge amount of consternation leading up to the launch of this program. I think there were many people who were honestly surprised that we actually went forward and flipped the switch on auction day and opened it up, and that it actually worked. That is, the computers didn't crash, the electricity did not crash, lights didn't go out, and the economy didn't crater. Obviously, that's not really the test of success. So it's going to take a while, I think, before people are willing to say this program really is what they would like to pursue. I think that the interest in our ability to do this program has actually been much greater in other parts of the world and in some other states too, because as it appears that it's possible, but not very likely, that we're going to see action at the congressional level that will really meaningfully move us towards a national climate program. More people, I think, are coming to the view that it's likely that the administration will use the authority that it has under the Clean Air Act and bring other laws into play too, and other financial incentive programs that are administered by DOE, for example, or the Department of Transportation, but that there will be something that looks like what we're all used to in the way of air pollution policy, which is the federal government putting out a number or a requirement for emissions, and then allowing the states to develop their own plans for how they will get there, including doing it in completely different ways as long as they can demonstrate that their program is equivalent in terms of effectiveness to what the federal government is doing. In a world like that, there will be a number of states that will be interested in what California is doing. There already, of course, are states in New England that have experience with auctioning allowances, so it's not like we're the only people who've ever done anything with auctions. But in terms of putting together a full-blown climate program, I think California is, in fact, the only state in the country. Other countries that are pursuing their own versions of cap and trade, including China, which has launched 5 experimental, as they call them, pilot programs for cap and trade, any one of which is as big as most countries would be. Australia, which is moving towards a carbon market. Some of our friends in Canada and Canadian provinces and so forth are very closely following what we're doing, and we're sharing a lot of detailed, practical information about how we're running the auctions and how we've decided how to deal with offsets and things like that. But Washington, not so much. Not so much.
So I understand that passing regulation and moving forward is full of challenges. Before we open the floor for questions, I was wondering, in your ideal world, imagine regulation was just like taking a blank sheet and designing climate. How would you think would be a good way of going forward, for example, at the federal level?
Well, we watched from here when the Waxman-Markey legislation moved through the House and then failed to be brought up in the Senate. And I'm speaking, of course, as somebody who has been a regulator and a bureaucrat for now the majority of my career. But I do believe that one of the biggest problems with the Waxman-Markey legislation was it attempted to solve all problems, balance all the equities, make all the decisions about who was going to get what by way of allowances and revenue under this program in a piece of congressional legislation. So the thing was, several feet thick. It was impossible to read. And it was so full of compromises. Not that compromise is wrong, compromise is necessary to get legislation passed, and there's nobody who's better at it than Henry Waxman. But what he ended up with was a bill that didn't allow any room to breathe. It didn't allow for change, it didn't allow for learning, it didn't allow for things that might go wrong in the implementation of it, as is inevitable. So I do think that there has to be a willingness to lay out some general principles, whether you do it through a tax, a cap and trade, a mixed program like we have here in California. You need to allow for some agency, whether it's EPA or some new agency, to actually put the program together and make it work on the detailed operational level. That's been my major piece of advice for people who are thinking about what to do here.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank
Mary.
you.
So now we'll open the floor for questions. There are 2 microphones on the 2 aisles. So if we could first applause Mary, and now we'll get open for...
Thank you.
Hi, Thank you for coming. I understand that the trading is now essentially done between utilities, and I wonder if that will be deployed so that the public can get involved, either by way of, say, owning solar panels on their roof or some other mechanism.
Well, the cap and trade program is only trading in allowances at this point and in offsets. So they're two different quantities, two different things, two different substances that are being traded. Allowances go to people who are under the cap, who are required to be capped. So you and your rooftop are not going to be given allowances, or because you're not required to cap your emissions. Your way of playing in this program, of getting a benefit from it, is several. There's several possibilities. One is your utility is going to want to get you to put a solar roof on because they're going to save money themselves over what they would have to pay for allowances if they're responsible now for serving you electricity. So they get you off their system from the point of view of having to buy allowances. You sell them back your excess electricity, you become part of their network. This is a movement in that direction, as is there are other policies also that are moving us in that direction. The other thing is that non-capped sectors do have the ability to become sellers of offsets if they can establish that they are doing something that's real, verifiable, in excess of any legal regulatory requirement, and enforceable over time. This is a very rigorous and rigid program on purpose, because we were very concerned as we were designing this program about offset programs that had been instituted in other parts of the world that turned out to be people trading in illusory credits, that things that really didn't result in any emissions reductions, or double counting things that they would have done anyhow. And we're not against people making money, but we're against people claiming credit for doing things if it's not moving us in the direction of actually getting more reductions. So it's a very limited world. You didn't ask the question this way, but I'm going to push it a little bit further. I do think that in the future, and hopefully the not too distant future, we are going to see communities, cities or counties or other entities at a regional level aggregating projects if they can figure out how they can actually measure and monitor and enforce the reductions, and getting credit for them. I mean, right now we have one small program which rewards people for creating or maintaining urban forests, where a city can demonstrate that they are growing their trees longer, caring for them better, storing more carbon than the norm. And you have to establish a baseline and look at what kinds of trees they're growing. It's incredibly detailed, but enough of this has now been done so that we believe you actually can have a credible program like that. And I think there will be programs like that for alternative energy in communities as well. Long answer, sorry. I'll try to be quicker. Over here.
Thank you so much for coming, Commissioner Nichols. So as you probably know, your colleagues at the Department of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources are bracing for a big boom in production in the Monterey Shale, and as their colleagues in other states like North Dakota and Colorado and Texas have found, that means a massive increase in both conventional air pollutants and methane. So I was wondering what, if anything, CARB is doing to address those methane emissions under AB 32.
Well, right now, all we're trying to do is to monitor what's going on so that we're not ignoring them and, turning an eye away while the emissions actually grow. And as you know, there's a lot of controversy about what the leakage is right now from existing operations and how well we're capturing that, as well as what's likely to happen in the future. Although there's a lot of talk about the Monterey Shale and the interest in developing it, this is mostly petroleum. It's not primarily a gas resource. And right now, despite the talk, we're not seeing a huge rush of people coming in to develop that particular resource. They've got plenty to do for the moment with the drilling for gas and for, with the current conventional, conventional meaning, steam injected kind of programs that are going on right now in California. But it is important that, we are a big oil producing state. There's no question about it. We're big users and we're big producers. And we're looking for ways to get a better handle on that. There's a lot of controversy about this element of it, but one of the things that we have been quite active in is looking to evaluate and to, if at all possible, promote use of carbon capture and sequestration in existing oil fields, because geologically they're suited for this purpose. You've got the CO2 there, it's being used anyway. We'd like to see it being sequestered and kept in underground formations for as long as possible. So that's our main role here.
Hi, Mary. Clara Bondrich, Climate Works Foundation. How are you?
I'm great.
Thank you so much for being here. I hope this isn't too much of a bittersweet question, but we all watched with bated breath as your name was bandied about on various short lists for EPA. And what advice would you give Administrator McCarthy? What would you be focusing on right now if that was your job? And related to that, do you think the administration's focus on giving EPA greater authority over carbon emissions is the better alternative to pushing a more political solution in the Congress?
Well, thank you. I have to say, I was bemused, flattered. It's always flattering to have your name bandied about for a presidential appointment, but I never wanted to go to Washington to do this job. I've been there, I've done that, not doing that again, particularly in light of the fact that we have this wonderful opportunity here in California to not just begin, but to really carry through on our commitments to learn and to do more and to be a light to the world. And we've had governors in both Governor Schwarzenegger and Governor Brown who are willing and able to do that, to put their political prestige and the glamour of the state of California behind this issue. It's fascinated both of them, and they've given it tremendous support. So I could not be in a better position to do the kind of work that I want to do. Gina McCarthy is a very good friend and ally of mine. We worked together during the Bush years, conspired would not be the wrong word to use, to try to push the federal government to support some of the things that we were trying to do, particularly with clean cars and fuels. She is a terrific person for this position. And I do hope that with her appointment and the appointment of Professor Moniz to be the head of DOE, that the president has a team of people with the right kind of scientific, administrative, and political chops to put together a strong program to push what he's already said he wants, which is a climate program that includes a recognition that we have a very diverse energy mix in the United States, and that we're going to have to push very hard for all the alternatives and the cleaner fuels, but at the same time, we're going to have to continue to live with petroleum as a fuel for a long time to come. How to put that all together and not exceed our what the carrying capacity of the world is obviously not an easy question to answer, but there's not a shortage of people here who are smart enough to help figure it out. The shortage is of the political glue to pull all of this together. And although, we chose to go the particular route that we've gone here in California, we're very eager to collaborate, to assist, and to work with any alternative program that anybody can come up with. I'm not at all eager to continue doing this all by ourselves. I mean, we need to have the United States at the table in the world and taking action at the federal level to deal with the country as a whole. But when we see how this is shaping up, we can then come in and help either by providing support and assistance to other states, by merging our program into a federal program. I mean, for all of the reasons that both environmentalists and businesses initially supported California as a leader on this, we also need to then make sure that we can help transition into an effective national program.
Mary, thanks for coming tonight. You've reminded us that you have the scientific, political, and administrative chops to make a really complicated program to bring it to power and to take something that we've all been hearing about academically as a possibility, the actual day-to-day making it work. And I wondered, what was really impressive was your thinking about how you can adjust, that you're going to have to be adjusting. And I was wondering if you could go into a little more detail as to some of the adjustments, some of the things you're going to be watching to figure out how you can manipulate the program in the future. The other thing I'd like you to talk about is someone in the water side. I'm really interested in, have you thought at all about expanding it to other things? And as you monetize carbon emissions, the other big issue coming up for the state is nitrogen emissions, and there's some trade-offs back and forth of should we be maximizing carbon or nitrogen, and how should we be doing it? I don't know if you've been thinking across agencies about that, or if
Well,
you could
only
talk
a
about
little
that
bit,
some.
but it's a really important question. So let me answer the easier one first. In terms of how we're looking at changing things that need to be changed, I'll give an example of a program that's kind of front and center right now in terms of political controversy in Sacramento, which is our low carbon fuel standard, which we enacted several years ago, but didn't really start putting pressure on to see reductions happening until just recently. So the oil industry is now very exercised about the fact that we're going to make them either use lower carbon fuels or buy credits from a bank that we've set up. The bank has, at the moment, lots of credits in it because the way the rule was set up, companies could come in and by establishing that they have cleaner alternative fuels on offer that they are actually able to sell, they can get credits that then the oil companies can buy. Needless to say, the companies are not happy about having to buy credits. I mean, that's just not, it's not how they do business. That's not what they want to do. Their vision of how they were going to comply with this program was that there was going to be plenty of inexpensive biofuels around that they would be able to use to stretch, you know, their gasoline supplies. And that industry has not come along as quickly as everybody had hoped. And so many of the credits that are actually in our bank at the moment are credits that are coming from the electricity sector. Well, guess which industry is now very enthusiastically defending the low carbon fuel standard. And we're not exactly sorry about that because, you know, longer term, we want to see a transition to electric vehicles, plug-in vehicles of a variety of kinds. And so, you know, the idea that there would be some money changing hands which would help get more charging stations out there into workplaces and apartment buildings and so forth is not something that we think is a bad idea. But this thing is coming to a head in the next couple of years, and we're probably going to have to find some way to make adjustments in the way the rule works to recognize that the original purpose hasn't quite panned out the way we hoped it would. At the same time, and this is just, you know, kind of the art of regulation. It isn't a science. If you look like you're backing off or no longer interested in these new advanced fuels, people who've invested significant amounts of money and who have great technologies are going to be left stranded, and you not only lose credibility, you lose an opportunity to really reward people who've done very important work. So we have to find a way to thread through this needle, making whatever adjustments need to be made to keep the program going, moving forward, but at the same time not cause a crash. And the only thing I can say about that is we've done it before, so we think we can do it again. But as far as the kind of bigger picture of, the atmosphere and the nitrogen versus the carbon, we've really just started talking to our colleagues in universities and in the water world about how to think about this problem. We are going to be doing a new scoping plan. So AB 32 was set up with 5-year plans. We have to do a new plan every 5 years. 2013, we're already due for a new plan. So by the end of this year, we expect to have a plan out which will have a lot more cross-cutting themes to it than the last one did. So instead of being just a set of regulations and programs, which is kind of a typical air regulatory approach to these things, it's going to have a lot more talk about waste as a whole, or agriculture as a whole, and a kind of a life cycle approach to how we deal with the overall greenhouse gas implications of those activities. So stay tuned. It's going to be interesting.
Hi, Chairman Nichols. My name is Nicole Schutz. I'm a second-year MBA student, and actually my question dovetails, I think, pretty neatly with the end of your last answer.
Okay.
So what has really struck me is that ARB has been asked to do things that it's never done before with the development of the AB 32 program. And I wonder if you can talk about some of the challenges you faced as an organization growing to meet those needs, and maybe any areas of expertise that you're still working on.
Sure, that's a good question. And will there be jobs in the future? I hope so.
Maybe.
I hope so. One of the things that the legislature did when they passed AB 32, and I can't begin to tell you how important this is that they gave us FTE, meaning positions. We were allowed to hire people to implement this totally new statute. So in a situation where government has not grown and has been shrinking across the board, Air Resources Board was allowed to grow by 100 positions starting back in 2006 in order to put together this program. And what we did, because we had to move pretty quickly, was to fill about half the positions with people that we were able to attract from other agencies within state government, and the other half with people coming, in many cases, straight out of universities or the private sector. And so we really, for the first time in a long time, had an infusion of wonderful people with diverse backgrounds and, all the educations that, we really need. We have not been able to keep every one of those people, but we've kept quite a lot of them. I mean, state government is not a place you go for rising salary expectations. If you're motivated by working on big, exciting projects and important things, it is a good place to work. It has the benefits that government service usually does in terms of, if you stick around long enough to earn a pension, you can get a pension. The healthcare benefits are good, but mostly it's something people do because they just want to be in the middle of the action. And so we have been able to hire some really terrific young people and just create a whole new infusion of energy and frankly a whole new generation of people, some of whom at least will stay with state government. And parenthetically, that's how we were able to succeed in air pollution, is that Jerry Brown, when he was governor the first time, did the exact same thing for ARB to enable us to have a program that actually effectively dealt with smog. And we became the premier air quality agency that we are because we were allowed to bring in really dedicated, competent people. Now, in those days, we were hiring atmospheric chemists, petroleum engineers, automotive engineers, and we hired people away from auto companies. And people wanted to be here because this was the place to be. If you thought you could, build cool cars that also didn't produce much air pollution, this was the place to be. And now we're hoping it's going to be the place to be for other purposes as well. But of course, it's not just ARB that's doing all this either. I mean, as we see how complex this issue is and how many different actions need to happen in order to really build an economy and a society that are have a smaller carbon footprint, we need people working in the energy agencies, we need people in the housing agencies, we need, every piece of our government has to be infused with this kind of thinking, and that's the fun part. And I think there are going to be opportunities as time goes on to work in this area. So, good question.
Please.
Yeah.
I'll add my thanks. Thank you very much. Going back to maybe Mike and Jack's comments that the science is settled, the policy isn't, and your challenge with DC and maybe thinking regionally, California's leadership might be pulling Oregon and Washington along. Oregon's a fairly progressive governor, and Washington with Jay Inslee may be a leader in this topic. And I just wonder if there are any conversations or any way of thinking about the leadership, and would that help California implement if Oregon and Washington could move forward?
Absolutely. We have had conversations at the level of the three governors about things they would like to work on together. All three of them are fearless in terms of being able to mention the word climate change in public and being willing to take action to promote clean technology in their states. One of the great things about governors is that they are all CEOs, and they all compete with each other for bragging rights and for being able to move their own states along. So you can't just say, I'm from California, I'm here to help you, Oregon, figure out how to, do a better job with your climate program. But where they find things that they really can collaborate on, the governors can work together. And right now, they've got a couple things that they're working on, one of which is expanding the market for plug-in vehicles, where they've been talking about policies, programs, and money actually working together to build the electric vehicle fleets for state and local governments, not just passenger cars, but all the kinds of working vehicles that governments use. And they're looking at ways to make their paving more efficient, to share and collaborate on advances in building technology. So there's actually quite a lot going on. None of it is quite at the press conference level at this point, but there's a lot of discussion going on, and I think there will be there always has been some degree of unity among the three coastal West Coast states. We have a lot in common with each other in terms of the value we place on our environment and our coastlines, and so I think there's going to be a little bit more collaboration in that regard, and that will be helpful in dealing with Washington also. So, good question.
I'm here as a critic. In September, it'll be 60 years that I started working on energy, 45 of which were taken up with research and development. I was an important part of inventing a new technology that's widely used in California, inventing, developing, and commercializing it. There are palm fronds being made into electricity in Mecca, California, rice hulls near Sacramento, wood wastes up and down the state. I remember some of the fiascos in regulation in California. I remember the first attempt for electric vehicles. I remember the argument I had with one of the board members. Why don't you try hybrids first? Oh, we can't do that. Oh, but my argument, you could actually have batteries developed and experiments. Why are you nodding at me?
Can you ask the question, please? Yes.
I will get to the question. The other fiasco was the attempt at not building electricity plants that cost Gray Davis his seat as governor. Why do you think that this effort will not end in electricity shortages, outages, fiascos like those two?
I think
Thanks for coming.
it's a pleasure to be here, and I wasn't expecting to come to a university and not hear a little bit of dissension or criticism, so thank you for that too. So I think that the issue about electricity shortages, which is the piece of this that I'm going to focus on, is extremely important. I don't share your view that the reason why we had the electricity crisis of 2000, 2001 was that we hadn't built enough power plants, but I agree with you that it was what cost Gray Davis's job. And I can assure you that no governor ever wants to have that happen again. And it's been very much part of our thinking in designing this program that we would be working with not only the electric utilities, but others who have a stake in power supply and power use to make sure that that didn't happen. As you know, it's a large, complex market for electricity. California does not generate all its own electricity. We import a great deal of our electricity. And one of the things that the legislature did, which I think was unique as far as I know, was to take responsibility for the carbon emitted from the electricity that we import. So we didn't just say we're only going to deal with what we're doing inside our borders. We said if we're bringing these electrons in, we're also going to be responsible for the carbon that we're causing, even if it's in somebody else's backyard. And that has made designing this program very complicated. And it is one of the things that we're keeping an eye on very closely. We are working with the California Independent System Operator, which is the entity that's responsible for keeping the lights on. There are balancing authority that's responsible for all of the reliability regulations at the federal level. And they are extremely alert to anything that looks like it's going to cause a shortage in supply or a collapse in the transmission system or shortage of voltage and all that sort of thing. And we meet on a very regular basis with them, as well as with the Public Utilities Commission and the Energy Commission, to make sure that our policies are working together. We are facing a very serious problem right now in Southern California, which is where I'm from, but it will affect the whole state because of the outage at San Onofre. The fact that we're missing one of our major baseload power plants because of the safety concerns there. We were able to get through last summer as a result of some fairly innovative things that the agencies did, including allowing a couple of plants that had been shut down to start up again during the summer. But that's not a permanent or long-term solution. And we're very busy right now looking at a series of things that we can do to bring more electricity online without compromising our other goals as well. And obviously that does include a lot more focused effort on demand management and making the system more flexible. So.
I wanted to actually very briefly address one of the earlier questions that was asked about how Californians can get more individually involved in AB 32 and the cap-and-trade. So I started a not-for-profit, which is called Carbon Lighthouse Association. If you donate, we will aggregate up your donations and actually buy allowances at quarterly auction. So I thought you'd get a kick out of that. I do have a question for you,
Did you
though.
register then as in the auction? Great. That's wonderful.
So the individuals are registered. The entity is not. It just received its SITS papers today, actually. So, next time.
Okay. Okay.
So I think California has had some incredibly successful policies that have actually had great energy impacts outside of the state. So specifically, a lot of the stuff with appliance standards has impacted national and actually global energy use. And actually the EV program, which was eventually pulled, also would have had a lot of implications nationally for car manufacturers. And I'm curious what other parts of AB 32 and the other things CARB is doing in general are sort of aimed towards having a more national impact with regards to energy reduction that I can get excited about.
Well, in terms of looking at efficiencies or pulling in new technologies, I mentioned the low carbon fuel standard, which was explicitly aimed at trying to promote investment and commercialization of advanced biofuels and other alternatives to petroleum as well. Our car standards by themselves, just having to push down on the emissions of CO2 have led to real innovations in the way cars are made and what they emit. We have a program which hasn't gotten as much attention publicly that requires all major emitters to perform an audit of their energy use and to look for ways in which they could save more energy above and beyond what they're doing right now as a result of the utility programs. And that's turning up some very interesting stuff, which we're going to be putting out publicly soon, but we're just collating it all right now. I think that the Energy Commission's work on new building standards and what the PUC has done with the net zero policy for new construction in California is incredibly exciting. And as the economy starts to pick up again, we're seeing tremendous activity on the part of builders of both homes and commercial buildings and competing with each other once again for the most energy efficient and attractive buildings that they can come up with. So I think there's still a lot of opportunity out there. The part that probably excites me the most, and I don't know if it does you, but I'm a city person. I live in Los Angeles, and so what I'm excited about is what's going on at the local level with communities really taking a look at how you can retrofit older cities and make them more efficient, not just in terms of their buildings, but in the need that people may have to get in their cars and drive. Just the fact that we're really looking now at making our communities walkable and bikeable, and that people are looking to live in places like that, that we're looking at people not just being forced to, but actually seeking to live in places where they can use transit. This is a new era for California, and I think we're going to do it in some kind of a uniquely California way. I mean, it's not going to be Manhattan, but it's going to be pretty cool.
Hi, my question is about 350.org, and I'm wondering if it has had much impact on California legislation, and do you have an opinion about it that you could share with us, whether it is a plus or a minus?
Well, I don't think it's a minus, but it hasn't been terribly influential in California either. And I'm not sure exactly why. I mean, it has, clearly people follow what's been talked about, but I don't see it as having really had impact at the level of the legislature. Unfortunately, the legislature mostly pays attention to the people that are there all the time, demanding things of them, and that tends to be existing industries and the lobbying groups that they hear from all the time. So it takes a while for something new and with a different perspective to really get heard inside Sacramento. I think that we wouldn't have had AB 32 if it hadn't been for the unique coalition that occurred there between environmental organizations and some leading edge businesses in California. And I don't think 350.org really has had that same level of cohesion yet that would have really enabled it to have a big impact at the legislative level. But I think there's, a lot of people are reading and getting ideas from a lot of different places these days, and so you never know quite how it's going to filter in.
Thank you. You mentioned some of the emerging carbon markets in China and Australia, but you didn't mention the European ETS, which is the big one. And I'm wondering, because there was a recent book published by an Oxford professor called The Carbon Crunch, which makes the case that the ETS, which also gave away very generous allowances to industry, has in fact not really had any impact on reducing carbon emissions in Europe. that it was really the process of deindustrialization. And I'm just wondering what California, how did you look at Europe and what did you learn from it?
Oh, good question. What I think we learned is not to be so generous in giving away allowances. We did give away allowances, but we only gave away what people were actually using. Europe didn't have such good information when they began their program. They relied on the individual countries to just kind of come up with their numbers themselves. When we started our program, we did it based on a pretty well-vetted inventory. We had been collecting mandatory data from the major industries in California for several years and having it audited by independent external auditors before we even started designing the cap and trade program. When we did start printing up allowances and talking to people about them, of course we had companies that came in and said, oh, no, we really were emitting a lot more than that. But we had the evidence of what they had submitted, and so we were in pretty good shape when it came to not overstating what the emissions were. And then, as I mentioned earlier, on a sectoral basis, we didn't give away 100% of the allowances, even at the starting point. We gave away 90% of the allowances, and then except for the electric utilities, a different situation. But for most of the companies that are under this rule, the utilities got 100% because they're required to auction and then use the proceeds for the benefit of their customers. So they're in a whole different situation. So I think that we learned a lot from the EU. We actually had, when I first got to Sacramento, we had one of the carbon experts from the UK who came and spent 6 months basically embedded at the ARB while we were working on the program. And although there are obviously security issues around all of this, I mean, we do have trade secrets for companies that we maintain, and there's not all the information about the auctions is public. We're looking at the potential for actually trading staff with China and allowing to have some experts from the NDRC in China working side by side with our folks to talk through a lot of the design elements, which sound simple when you talk about them on the kind of charts that we saw earlier, but are incredibly complicated to actually work through. Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.